see.
Ready when you are. All right. Well, we've got a full crowd here, so let's get started. Well, we do sunset over place farms in a pond. I mean, that's like well, good evening, everyone. Thank you all for being here tonight. My name is Pat Baker. I'm the Director of Government and Institutional Affairs for Greater Mankato Grove, one of our debate sponsors for this evening. I'm also one of your moderators. I want to thank you all for being here to witness the forum between the candidates vying to represent the Senate District 19. As I said, this forum was presented by Greater Mankato Grove along with our media partner KEYC. I also want to thank KTV. They are cameras in the back there. They're reporting this event, and we would want it on public access or online in the future. A couple things I want to address in terms of housekeeping. We'll get to that in a bit. I do want to let you know that our other upcoming candidate forums are going to be first this week. We have City Council for Mankato. All candidates are ready for that. We're having a forum on the 13th. Down at City Council Chambers, it'll be at 7 o'clock. The House District 19B forum with Jack Considine and Adam Isaacson will be in this room on October 18th, again at 7 o'clock. And you can get more information on those upcoming forums by going to our website. That's greatermankato.com. We have that event page right on there. You can check that out. One other thing that you want to be aware of, and then that's the sign speaks to right there, is Mankato and Northern Mankato have proposed extending their current 0.5% sales tax. Will be on the district ballot on November 8th. So basically, we're just making sure the public know that that is going to get ballot, so you can get informed on it and cast an informed decision. We do have one page there that are factual. We'll give you a little bit of information about what's going on. So feel free to grab one of those on your way out. So a couple of remarks here. First, I want to set out a few expectations for our audience to help us present an engaging and civil dialogue this evening. We have more questions than we have time for, so we ask you to help us make the most of our time by holding your applause until the end. And that there'll be no shouting or heckling. We're going to try and run this debate a little bit cleaner than it was last night. So, yes, I agree. So this evening's format is going to be as follows. Each candidate will be allowed 3 minutes to make opening and closing remarks. I tried to flip a coin. We have other party candidates here who don't make that coin, so we drew some pieces of paper. And let's see, Willa, who's going first? Nick's going first. And then we'll go right on down the line to Willa, and then to Shane. So that's 3 minute opening, and then we'll have 3 minutes of remarks. We will ask questions. Each candidate will get 2 minutes to respond to the question. One thing we want to note is we're more interested in having a robust and engaging dialogue than we are about seeing how closely candidates can give it 2 minutes. So we're going to try and keep them close to that. If they don't go by seconds, we're not going to be worried about that. No filibuster, okay? Can't do that. So I want to introduce our other moderator this evening. It's Dion Cheney, who is the co-anchor of KEYC 6 at 10 o'clock news broadcast. I want to thank Dion for lending his time and expertise and helping me moderate tonight's forum. And finally, it is my pleasure to introduce the candidates for this evening's forum. Nick Frentz, over at the end, is the DFL candidate.
Hi, everybody.
Willa Dailey, closest to me, is the Republican candidate.
Hi.
And Shane Wernsing in the middle is the Libertarian candidate.
Hi.
So let's thank you for being here this evening. One thing I do want to say about questions is we have some audience questions. You have one of these, and then have one to bring and hand it over, and I will grab one from you. You need to read my copy? All right, read my copy. Got a pen? I do. All right. When we go with this, I'll start our line, and feel free to hand those down. And if the person at the end umpire just kind of drop on them, that would be what appreciated. We'll try to get to as many of these reports the evening as we can. All right. With that, first question. I'm sorry, you have opening arguments. Wow, see, so, opening statement.
Thank you. Good evening, everybody. As I've already been introduced, my name is Nick Frentz, and I'm proud to stand before you as the DFL endorsed candidate for State Senate in District 19. For those of you that don't know me, I'm married, have 4 great kids, and for the last 3 decades, my wife and I have lived in North Mankato. I'm an unashamed cheerleader for this area, partly because on my father's side, they go back about 150 years in West Mankato. And I know this debate is about both where we've been and where we're going. And so I wanted to start by saying, when I talk to you, I talk to you as someone that cares just as much as you do. You would not be sitting here if you didn't care about the future of our area and the future of our state. And as an unashamed cheerleader for the state of Minnesota and for this area, I'm here tonight to tell you what I stand for, what I think the truth is about the state of Minnesota, and what I propose to do for you as your state senator. So where have we been? Well, nationally, you may have noticed there's a presidential campaign in the news. We're coming off the worst recession in 90 years. Unemployment is down, the stock market is near an all-time high, and the Vikings are undefeated, and they play in a stadium that's the envy of the entire country. On a statewide level, we have $900 billion surplus. We have unemployment in this area of about 2.8%. We have insured more Minnesotans with health care coverage than all but one state in the country. And we have a quality of life that is also the envy of most of the rest of the state. We have things we can do better, but let's be honest about where we are right now. Both parties have brought us to education as a priority. My #1 priority as a candidate is education. My wife and I have been thrilled to have our 4 children in area schools, and I want those same opportunities for kids in the same future schools to have the same great education. I'm sure we'll talk about that a little more. I'm also very proud to be a member of Greater Mankato Growth. And one of the things I'm going to sell to you tonight is that the same things that make Greater Mankato Growth so successful are the things that will make our state and our state legislature so successful. Teamwork, working together. I'm a Democrat here, not afraid to hear any ideas from any party. If it's better for our state, I am for it. If it's worse for our state, I am against it. Now, what does my campaign stand for? It stands for hard work. I've been campaigning for the better part of a year. I work all day, all night, almost every single day, only taking a short break to watch football. We have been door knocking since June 1st. I've personally appeared on over 5,000 doorsteps. I've talked to the people in the neighborhoods. I've asked them what's important to them. Many of them are our friends and neighbors, and hundreds have been willing to support us with donations and lawn signs. Hard work has brought my campaign to the point where I'm proud to tell you that we have been endorsed by the Minnesota Police and Peace Officers Association, by Minnesota Farmers Union, by Education Minnesota, by Conservation Minnesota, by electricians, by snowplow operators, by the Minnesota Nurses Association. I realized yesterday I could not recite them all from memory because there are so many. The reason I share that with you is because you should be asking, what is that Senate candidate going to do for you? What is that candidate going to do for the state of Minnesota and for our area? And these groups, they go through a candidate screening that we've all been through, questionnaires, interviews, and each one of those endorsements says to me, we will support you. Be ready to answer tough questions when the time comes. So where are we going? Well, I'm a business owner. And what we're going to talk about tonight has to do with how we set our priorities as Minnesotans. Minnesota has a $42 billion biannual budget. I promise you I've listened to all ideas, and I will. If you are for cutting taxes, tell me the name of the people that will be affected by your tax cuts. If you want to spend more, tell me who's going to pay more taxes and what are you going to do. I'm open-minded to all of those. The things that we do as a state define us. I'm proud of what we've done in Minnesota. My campaign emphasis is education, good jobs, and transportation. I'm assuming we'll get a chance to talk about some of that too. I'm asking you to support me in the state senate race. I want to be the kind of senator who can call up and say, hey, Nick, I want to ask you about this. And the kind of senator where you can stop by and say, can we talk about this? And even if I disagree with you, I will do it with dignity and respect, where we can say, he disagreed, but I can tell you heard. You will not need to worry about partisan politics if I'm your senator. If it is good for the people here, I'm for it. Thank you very much.
The folks standing, we do have a chair here, chairs on the end. If you'd like to take some time and situate yourself for it and take a quick pause so we can all be comfortable with this.
First of all, I'm going to say a man did this setup. Having a high stool here, get on and off carefully. I've already been introduced as the Republican endorsed candidate, and what I hope to convey to you tonight is that this is not just about the three of us who represent each of our political parties running against each other. This is a race about ideals. This is a race about where the state has been, where it is now, and where we want it to go. And Nick and I were able to attend recently a forum done by Center of the American Experiment, where we get great kudos in some areas of our state, the things that we can brag about, the things that other states are envious of. But there's something looming in the distance that we have to be watchful for. And that is that what goes up can come down if we don't keep an eye on it. And one of the jobs of a state legislator is to evaluate, quantify, and assess what the priorities need to be in order to keep that ongoing. And I have taken and broken down how to do this. There's three elements. And those elements are not interchangeable. They all go together in the discussion. And that is it good for the individual? Number one, does it restrict our freedom, break our lives? Number two, is it good for the district? And number three, is what I'm doing going to be good for the state? Those three things go hand in hand. I was born and raised in Mankato, and had an opportunity to leave for a decade in between to have a chance to live in a couple of other states, Arizona and California. I have seen how other state governments operate with very different rules than ours. For example, Arizona was a right-to-work state. It worked for them. California, what can I say about that? That state is different from end to end. I was fortunate to be placed in Orange County, the last conservative holdout in the entire state. But you know, they have some unique problems of their own too. And we have unique problems up here. We have a state, for example, water quality is something that's a big issue to everybody. And we have a state that is known for its water. And those are things that are important to all of us for our own quality of life, as well as just the environmental aspect of it. The other thing I'd like to say is that elections are also about an opportunity for change. They're about an opportunity to assess where we're at and evaluate who might best be prepared to take the next steps to get us forward. The American experiment says that we are potentially heading for a downslide here, just based on a whole lot of economic factors that I think we may get into tonight. Those are things that we have to look out for. And what I would also address is gridlock. This is another issue that when I go out door knocking, and I have also knocked thousands of doors and talked to many people about what's bothering them, everybody says, how are you going to address gridlock? I can tell you that having lived in 3 states and having a wide variety of friends, I have friends who are as hardcore Democrat as they get, and I have friends who are as hard-right Republican as you get, and I have friends who are libertarian. And we all get along just fine. We respect each other's opinion. We try to make conversations about what we can do to agree rather than what we can do to divide. Because that's what government is supposed to be, is divided, not divisive. And if you look at just the last 5 years, we have gone through a government shutdown, and we've gone through our last legislative session that ended in gridlock. There's one common thread that goes through all of that. One common thread. And that's that the Minnesota Senate has been controlled by the DFL since 1973 with the exception of 2 years. All other things being equal, I would ask that you consider that and consider that maybe the place to start this change and end this gridlock is right here in District 19 by electing a Republican for a change. And I'm going to ask for your support and your vote on November 8th and see if we can't make that happen. Thank you.
Mr. Wernsing.
Well, thank you all for coming. As more people wandered in, I got more and more nervous at what I had to do here tonight, but it's good to see you all. Personally, I'm a physician and psychiatrist. I've lived and worked in St. Peter and Mankato areas for 16 years, including time at Gustavus Adolphus College. I'm married. I have 4 kids who go to school. My wife works in the area as well. She's also a physician. There may be people here who don't know what a libertarian is. Like most of you, I live my life socially accepting and financially responsible. I'm a small business owner, and I run my business that way. I see patients from all walks of life, and I have to meet my budget. I also think that the government should do the same. So libertarianism is sometimes thought of as taking the socially accepting portion of what we're used to seeing with Democrats and the financially responsible portion of what we're used to see with Republicans. The retiring senator, as you know, is a nurse and she has medical training. She was involved in the security hospital when I worked there as a full-time staff. And I think that as she leaves, it's important to keep somebody with medical training in the legislature, in the Senate. If you follow the news, the MSOP group home that's over by Whiskey River, that's a problem. The injuries at the security hospital, MNsure costs. There are a lot of medical marijuana, end-of-life issues. There are a lot of medical things coming up, and I believe I could be an asset there. The government's natural tendency is to grow, and that seems to happen no matter which party is in power. And that's something I would work very hard against. Oftentimes, the government grows at the expense of our liberty, personal and economic, as individuals and as businesses. So I will work to decrease the size of the government, and I can get into examples as we talk here or in my closing. The positives of Minnesota are many. However, the federal government, $22 trillion in debt, if you do just simple math, the amount of that would come to us if you just apportion it amongst the states, $440 billion. Now, whatever we do going forward as Minnesota, we need to be stable and healthy in order to weather whatever changes are going to come from the federal government. The great damage is going to happen when that bill comes due. Some other ideas that I would like to have or consider: proportional representation and ranked choice voting. For decades, we've never had more than 2 choices. Even with 3 people up here, the chances that the 80 or so thousand people in this district are going to find somebody they align with are still pretty slim. What ought to be up here are 5, 6, 7 people, and you ought to be able to rank them as you want, or even proportionally represent yourselves in the legislature. Lastly, as I think they said, I was unanimously approved by the Libertarian Party of Minnesota at our state convention in April, and I'll end there. And thank you again for all coming.
Thank you.
Okay. All right. My first question is, as this was discussed, that the last legislature left with a lot of undone business: tax bill, the bonding bill, the transportation bill, and they couldn't even agree on this.
I don't think the mic is on.
President, we got to object.
I think the mic. Yeah, you're right. The mic is for the benefit of the television recording. So
I'm going to
begin saying that the last legislature left a lot of work undone and could not agree on a special session to do it. Gridlock was addressed earlier. What will you bring as a senator to try and bridge that gridlock on an individual effort?
Mr. Frentz, let's start with you.
Okay. Well, first of all, we have to do better. I mean, I've said this in the paper and on radio. The number one question I get asked when we door knock is, why can't they compromise? And I think the answer is, we have too much partisan politics and not enough time to figure out what is actually best for the district. I have things I disagree with the Democratic Party. I have things I disagree with the other party. But if you're up there, you're going to be asked to consider the evidence, the data, and try to figure out what is best. The number one thing I promise you, if I'm your state senator, is to work across party lines and to advocate for the things that are best for the people of Minnesota, for you people, instead of what the party says. Second, these solutions are by the very nature of them complicated. I'm guessing we're going to talk about health care, so I'll save that for another answer. But if you look at health care, you can find solutions. You can say, these are our alternatives, and you can talk to the people and say, what do you favor? I'm not going to talk about health care, but you can do that. We've seen surveys come out this year where groups like Greater Mankato Growth allow us to know more about what the public says. And my prediction for you is it will be harder and harder for members of any party to go against the will of the people. That's a good thing. Second, you've got to disagree with a little dignity. One of the things I'm most proud of as a candidate is the way we've been supported by people all across the political spectrum. Many of these are people I've known for decades, and my wife and I, you might find this interesting, never talked about politics in our 27 years of marriage, never talked to our friends about politics, made all our acquaintances through the communities, through the schools, through hockey and football, without talking about it. Therefore, I came to this position without really knowing what most of the people that we knew thought was the right and the wrong way. That's a good thing. And in the same way that I now feel I can go to any member of any political party and say, hey, what do you think? I feel that as your state senator, I'd be able to talk to a House of Representatives member from the other party, a senator from a different part of the state, someone that I disagreed with greatly, or someone where we just had a little wrinkle we had to iron out. That's the kind of senator that will help break gridlock. And part of that is you have to be willing to stand up to your own party. Part of it is you have to be able to say in your own caucus, I know, but this is not good for the people in Senate District 19. Now, let me ask you this question. You don't have time to answer. We want to succeed, right? We want to be able to brag about our area. Would you want to work at a company where half the people ran around insulting the other half, thinking the other half didn't know what they were talking about? Of course not. You'd hate working there and they wouldn't make any money. Would you want to play on a team where half the people did not like the other half, wouldn't listen to their ideas, shut them down? Of course not. And that team would never win. Would you want to be represented by a state legislature where partisan politics shut down the good ideas that come from all across the state? Of course not. And as your senator, I pledge to you, above all, I'm willing to work with anyone who has a good idea. A good idea is what the people need. And just like the people we talk to at the doors, I believe the people of Minnesota are going to start demanding politicians work across the aisle, and that's a very good thing for the people in District 19 and a very good thing for the state of Minnesota. Thank you.
Let's go with Ms. Dailey.
Gridlock, as I said earlier, gets brought up a great deal. And I hate the word compromise. I have spent 40 years in the real estate business creating consensus. And there's a big difference. With a compromise, somebody walks away from the table having given something up in order to gain something. With a consensus, we create a win-win situation. And in my business, what I do is I take two people with opposing goals, one who's trying to get a house bought as cheap as they can, and one who's trying to get as much money for it as they can. And somehow, at the end of that marketing period, get two people to the closing table, smiling, shaking hands, telling stories about the family that was there and the family that will be there. That's consensus. And we need more of that. And I agree with Nick that it's got to come from the people. People are angry about this. And it's why change is so imperative right now, looking for another direction. You know, change is good, even when it's uncomfortable. There's nothing wrong with it. And I've been through a lot of changes in my life. And not just physical, but work-related through the real estate business. I had a whole bunch of stuff in my life that has created an ideal that consensus is always better. I want people to win. We are going to get into some of the things that create gridlock, the ideas that create gridlock in our state. And there's so many special interests. One of the things that, as a new candidate, I found just almost overwhelming was the number of candidate questionnaires and surveys and email questions and text messages and phone calls. There are so many special interest groups in this state, all asking for a piece of your taxpayer pie. And again, we've got to find a way to make everybody agree on what the priorities are. And I think that we'll establish that tonight between the three of us. And you'll be able to determine whose priorities best align with yours and which one of us is going to be best suited to build consensus instead of having compromise and continue to put Band-Aids on gaping wounds. Thanks.
Mr. Wernsing?
As a Libertarian Party member, I will be groundbreaking for you in the Senate. I can caucus with either side, but never permanently. I can form alliances, bring people together. And just so you're all aware, there are 5 other Libertarian either Senate candidates or House of Representative candidates across the state. And also they're very well received, and we could work together as a group to do that. Passing these large bills is something I disagree with. It's dealing with one subject at a time will not only let the senator or the other legislators vote on a specific issue, but the people who, like you, who come here, want to read about something, have a chance to actually come to an opinion and give it to somebody when there's one topic at a time being addressed. Although it would be more work, they could be passed and dealt with more efficiently at piece by piece as opposed to one large unit. Another thought that I have is, some of the gridlock that's happening was intentional. People weren't meant to have this many laws that govern every aspect of our being. There's a book that I've read, I think it's called 3 Felonies a Day, where the average person going through their life, without even knowing it, violated 3 laws, just because there's so many things written that just oversee our day-to-day activities. And that needs to be simplified. So I would look at actually putting sunset provisions on legislation. Even if it's 10 or 20 years, I'm almost certain we never got everything right in every law the first time. They can be redebated. People who it affects can have input again, and a new and improved version can come to be. Or if it is not a good law, it can simply die natural death or get replaced by something else. And so those are some of the ideas that I would bring to work across party lines and end gridlock and simplify things. Thank you.
Thank you. Well, let's dive into one of the topics that we've been hearing a lot about at the state level, and that's transportation. So Minnesota's transportation infrastructure faces funding challenges at all levels, including a significant shortfall in state highway funding over the next 20 years. Last year, legislators broadly agreed that the state needed at least $600 million a year in new transportation spending to fill the gap. However, they were unable to compromise on how best to raise those funds. How do you propose addressing our state's transportation challenges? And Mr. Wernsing, or I should say Dr. Wernsing, let's start with you for that.
Okay. I was still taking notes, so I didn't want to go first. I'm not very old, but in my adult life, I've never heard people say that transportation is adequately funded. So I want to look at, are there things other than just the simple dollar amount that can be done to make it work better? The thing that comes to mind as I stand up here is the light rail project, the one they're debating now. Last I read, 1.5 billion initial cost. And then what really perked my ears up was 6%. The maintenance costs were expected to grow by 6% per year. Now our economy is growing by 6% per year. So let's say it's 3%. Eventually those two lines cross in a very bad way. Money is being spent that we aren't growing as a state large enough to be able to pay. So just to give you a specific platform, I would oppose any further light rail funding. You can't move the tracks, they don't move freight, they only move people. Population centers change and shift over the decades. And in some cases, they take longer than the buses that are already running those routes. It's money that need not be spent, that could be used to fix other things. Highway 14, other routes that are actually dangerous because they're so poorly maintained. So as just a clear platform, so you know where I stand, you've got to use the money correctly and not for something that 90% of us won't see or ride. Thank you.
Right. Mr. Frentz, we're going to go to you next.
Okay. Well, as a first-time candidate, I do not have a voting record in the Senate, but I do have a record on this. In April, I told KEYC radio that I favored the House Democrat compromise on transportation funding, including the partial use of an increased gas tax. If your roof is leaking, you're going to have to fix it. We do not have a partisan disagreement about how much we need. We need about $600 million a year. I favor a stable, long-term, dedicated source of transportation funding, just like the House DFL proposed, including my friend sitting right there, Clark Johnson. So that's my record. I was extremely pleased to see the survey that GMG released last week, and I hope you did too, where an overwhelming majority of people who responded to the survey along the Highway 14 corridor said they favored the use of the gas tax. My prediction is it will be very difficult for either party to go to St. Paul next year and work so hard against the gas tax that they ignore the will of those people along the Highway 14 corridor. I have worked for families in my 30 years as a lawyer who have had people killed on the one-lane each way part of Highway 14. And let me tell you folks, when you sit in those living rooms and dining rooms, they're not asking you where you're going to get the money. They're going to say, why wasn't it fixed? And let me ask you this, how many lives have been saved by the expansion of Highway 14 to 4 lanes already? How many families did not get a call at 2 in the morning that someone had been killed because of the safety and improvements that we have already made? Now, if your roof is leaking, you could say, well, we'll just cut from somewhere else. We won't go to the amusement park with the kids, or we'll save on some other part. That's fine. I don't favor that. And I think the survey tells you that the majority of people who are interested in this issue want to see an additional source of revenue. Now, when I stood before you in my opening statement, I said, if you want to increase taxes, tell me what you're going to spend it on and who's going to pay it. If you want to cut spending, tell me which people are not going to receive the benefit of that money, and then we'll talk about it. This is one I favor, the gas tax increase. That is the only tax increase that anyone's proposed that I know of that I favor. And I would put it this way. We're in about the middle among the states for gas tax. There are other ways to raise that revenue. I'm open-minded to those. This is the best idea that I've heard. I'd also say, as far as light rail, the last proposal to come out of the Senate, which, by the way, the Senate senators that we're talking about this warned them in the spring, don't send it over here without light rail. But here it comes in the last hour. If Hennepin County and its taxpayers want to pay for it so bad, I think we as Senate District 19 citizens ought to ask ourselves, why is it we're so against it? Keep in mind one small budgetary feature of the great state of Minnesota. More tax money from the metro area goes to outstate schools than comes from outstate taxpayers to go to metro schools. So one of the things I'm asking you folks to consider is the better we get along, the more we represent the people of Senate District 19, the more we'll be able to say to those metro area legislators, hey, let's lend a hand here and get Highway 14 finished. Then you're building bridges. Then you're doing things that bring the two parties together. And then the people that are out there riding on those roads, like my friends who ride from New Ulm back in the Nick Port, can say, hey, look at that, they got that done. Ask yourself what people would say about the legislature if Highway 14 was completed in the 2 segments. That's what I think about transportation funding. Thank you.
Ms. Dailey?
I can keep mine real simple. Transportation gets me excited. I actually did a little homework on my own when I got into this and found out a little interesting fact and figure that Minnesota has more highway miles. It ranks like number 6 in the United States in highway miles, but yet we rank somewhere down around 24th or 25th in our collection of gasoline tax. Gasoline tax funds transportation. Transportation, in my estimation, consists of roads and bridges. Highway 14, which is near and dear to all of our hearts, has to be finished, and it has to be finished now. This has been going on for decades. When I talk to people about this, people that are in their 50s and 60s, and they say, we started talking about this when I was a kid. This is ridiculous. The price of the labor and the materials goes up exponentially. Again, it's about building a consensus. Why should we have Highway 14 finished from New Ulm to Rochester? Not just because it's going to benefit all of the people along that corridor, but that is also an extension to other cities and services and transportation needs, delivering our groceries here and getting our farming products across the state. It is really, really going to be a key function in the area. And by building a consensus, you try to make your case for why this stretch of road affects other stretches of road. So it doesn't come down to just as simple as a gasoline tax. It really doesn't. What I would like to look at is how we're calculating our gasoline tax. How are we collecting the funds that fund our transportation? It's something that needs to be looked at hard, and I know of other states that do it differently. And I think that it's important to learn from the mistakes and the successes of other states. We will never, ever have transportation fully funded. That's kind of like a mortgage. Even after you pay it off, you still don't own it because you got to pay the real estate taxes on it in perpetuity. So it is with transportation. It's never going to be fully funded. And there's some other avenues that we can go down there. The discussion of light rail, which seems to be what thwarts moving forward with funding transportation for the long term, instead of, again, just sticking a Band-Aid on it in the short term. That's an issue that I don't think we can afford to go down right now. And that's where I'm going to differ. We're a long way from being in a position to start looking at light rail when we've got much bigger problems in the state to look at in the short term. When it comes to the Southwest light rail, there's got to be a lot more studies done, land acquisitions, negotiations, possibly condemnations. We're years away from that. And I understand that there is an idea that some federal funding might come our way to help support it if we would just let it pass. I prefer to take care of the people in this district, in this state, and the existing highways that we need to travel safely. So as Nick says, we don't have the 2 a.m. phone call saying one of our family members was killed on that road. And if that is too much of a priority to just push light rail aside for a while until we're a little more ready for it as a state, then that is exactly where I stand. I want to push that aside for a while. Get what we need done here and get it done now. Thank you.
So, Willa, before you sit down, I'd like to address a little bit further exactly where you all stand on transportation revenue and what those sources are. So if I'm understanding your position correctly, you would say delay doing light rail projects and use those funds to complete road and bridge projects like Highway 14?
Things that already exist in need. Yes.
Would you support any new revenue for transportation, whether that be gas tax or license tab fees or other new revenue that's talked about at the state level?
Absolutely, we have to look at it. We have to find it somewhere. We have to find it from a source that doesn't hit one sector against the other, our rural people against our city people. We have to do that.
Last question. Do you think Highway 14 can be completed Rochester to New Ulm without a gas tax increase or without some new source of revenue from the state?
not the way it looks right now.
Dr. Wernsing, I want to ask the same questions to you since you argued and talked about funding for new transportation. Where do you stand on gas tax and a new revenue in general? Do we need it? Are we going to be able to finish Highway 14, which is a key priority for this region, without new transportation revenue?
Yes, if we give up the idea of needing to lay down more rail. And remember, we're paying for 40-some employees already who are supposedly working on this next light rail line. And we've been paying for them for a year or two. And that's ridiculous. That's lost money. We can't throw bad money, or we can't throw good money after bad. And we can get those things done that you mentioned if we stop trying to push that through a populace at large that does not want it.
Since I love on time, Mr. Frentz, I'll let you respond.
We are free and unconquerable people, and we're all smart thinkers about our own best interest. Let's just be careful starting to tell ourselves, we know that we need 14 finished, but those people, the 2.5 million that live in the metro that think light rail is a good idea, they're wrong. We're all just as smart as each other. We are talking about a metro area project with approximately $150 million of state funding in order to unlock hundreds of millions of federal funding. If you are cheering for the state of Minnesota and Hennepin County taxpayers say, no, we really want to do that, I think we have to be careful as we work to build cooperation between the parties by saying, no, we're going to stop that. And as far as the gas tax, I would say I'm open-minded to all of it. I'm just one of those people that says the roof is broken. Let's fix it, and the gas tax allows you to get a stable, long-term, dedicated funding stream. How's that?
Thank you.
Thank you.
Jan has our next question.
Okay, the next question I have, we're going to switch to agriculture now. And one of the things with the last couple of sessions is this policy about buffer strips that was put in kind of became kind of a big saga. And I guess the question I have is, what is your philosophy, your approach to the state and regulating the agriculture industry, and what's your philosophy toward that and the relationship between the government and the ag industry? And let's see. Willa.
Buffer strips, near and dear to my heart. My husband and I have a farm on the LeSueur River that is literally devouring everything we own as we speak. It's been going on for a long time. We've done everything we can that the government recommended to prevent that from happening. Our entire property is a buffer zone. We put it in the CRP and the woodland management as they asked us to do. We did everything we could to take care of the land. And yet, it's falling in the river. The buffer zone, in order to be effective for Jay and I, would mean they're going to have to start planting trees in our living room right now. It's that bad. So it didn't work. All of the management, the land management, didn't work for us. It doesn't mean it isn't a problem in other areas. But what I see in this issue is, again, divisive instead of divided. We have too many people that believe it's all agriculture's fault, that the rivers are eroding, and that the water quality is bad. And I think that the use of the water around the state is used by everybody. Swimmers, people who live along lakes. We're just learning in the last 50 years what the impact of what we do has. And I refuse to blame agriculture entirely for the problems that we have. And I think that farmers are good stewards of the land, and they know the best practices to retain the soil in the best possible state. And so with regard to the buffer strips, they are a good idea in select places. But I'm a little disappointed that we place so much of the blame on agriculture. I'm a little disappointed that we don't take a closer look at more of our waterways instead of just creating a map that says, hey, it's a moving waterway, it's a public waterway. Here's the red line, here's where the buffer strip is, and that's where it's got to be. Meanwhile, my property, you can buy no insurance for what's going on. Will go in the river, and the buffer strip won't help me. Now, I'm not the only one. There's a lot of people that live along not just the LeSueur River, but the Minnesota and the Lewis and everywhere else who are having the same problem. And it's a tremendous gap in our emergency management system is you are either a productive farm or you're a city dweller. Those of us who like to live a little farther outside of town and don't produce any livestock or crops, nor do we live within the city limits where we can actually vote on things. We're stuck in the middle. We're rural residential. We found that out with FEMA about almost 20 years ago, that there was no provision made for that. And so what I want us to think about when we pass laws like buffer zones and things that impact so many people is to look a little farther at that impact than just what sounds like a good idea for one interest group or another. And look at how it actually affects individual people like me and like any of you who have had the same problem or are facing the potential same problem. And that's just what I think about it.
We have Dr. Wernsing is second.
Okay. My general belief is in line with libertarian thinking, which is the more local government that can take care of a problem, the better. There are many reasons for this. Probably none of us sitting here have any hopes of influencing what the president does, or possibly even what our senator does. But you have a pretty good chance of influencing your county board or your city council. Also, people on those two bodies, those legislative bodies, know the area better. They drive the roads. They see the fields. They probably have friends and family who are going to be affected by such legislation. It also allows us to come up with, I was going to look this up before tonight, 87 counties I think we have. Maybe it's 84, but each region could come up with a different solution. And one county might settle on just the best possible solution that nobody else would have thought of. And the other counties can go from that. It's like the laboratories of democracy that the states were meant to be, where there is some trial and error, but you aren't forcing all 87 counties to do the same thing. I own 40 acres of land. I restored it to native prairie. I keep bees. I really enjoy my land, and I am the best person to. I'm the one who cares most about my land, what goes into it, what comes out of it, and farmers are the same way, as Willa just said. So the people that are more local, and even the private individuals, are best able to care for the land, the water quality, and if any legislation is needed, it ought to be not some central bureaucracy in St. Paul. It ought to be many local agencies, local bodies. Thank you.
Well, first of all, this is a big issue. Agriculture is $19 billion a year to our state economy. Nicollet County, I believe, is #2 in the state of pork production. We have to work in partnership with agricultural interests. Let me get right to my record on this. I already wrote the St. Peter Herald. I said the original buffer strip legislation was a problem because they did not listen to farmers enough. The main complaint, we only have 2 minutes, is it was one size fits all. That is not the way to handle this problem. Having said that, we have an issue with water quality. This is the water our children and grandchildren are going to swim in. So we're all in this together. It is not simply an agricultural problem. We have wastewater treatment issues. We have city and counties. We have all of us in together, but we have to make clean water a priority. The question the St. Peter Herald asked is, did you think the governor of Dayton was too aggressive in his clean water initiatives? My answer was yes, a little bit too aggressive. If you want farmers to be co-partners with you, you have to treat them like partners and not adversaries. I'm proud to be endorsed by Minnesota Farmers Union, which is a group that speaks for family farms. These family farms have been in Minnesota families for generations. Why do we want to work against them? There was an article on the front page of the Free Press today that talked about a Lake Crystal farmer who had on their own initiative taken steps. Now there's technology and innovation here that we can look at if we work together. Alfalfa, the buffer strips don't all have to be 50 feet. All of these are ways we can work together. But the problem was the way we singled out farmers and agriculture, which is especially important to rural Nicollet County, which of course is part of District 19. I favor all of us working together for clean water. It has to be a priority. I agree with the governor in that. But we will have cleaner water, we'll have happier agriculture and sporting industry if we all work on it together. And a quick tip of the cap to GMG for Wernsing, which is a new initiative to make the 22 county area a national center for agriculture. That is awesome. And within those partnerships, we'll be able to talk to agriculture, producers that support it, businesses that support it, and say, hey, let's get going. If Minnesota is half the state that the University of Minnesota Agriculture Department of Research says we can handle this. We can do it much better together, and you'll be dealing with your friends and neighbors. Now, a couple other things about agriculture. We also have property tax issues for farmers. And the main issue that was in the tax bill that did not get passed is we would have provided relief to farmers where school funding was concerned. As I already told you, education is my #1 priority as a state senate candidate, and I wholeheartedly favor that, and would have been a tremendous benefit to allow farmers to vote their conscience on new schools without worrying about a reasonable tax burden. That tax bill went down, and that's too bad, but that would be back. For all those reasons, I would simply say, work together with agriculture. Address city and county wastewater facilities, will be way better off. The only problem we had with buffer strips was not the spirit but the letter. It was just too much one size fits all, and that's what I think.
Thank you. Well, let's shift gears here a little bit and talk about an issue that's been in the news lately in Minnesota and of concern to a lot of individuals, and that's race relations. So across the country, we've seen major strikes between communities of color and police agencies. Minnesota is not immune to these challenges. What should the state do to help restore trust between law enforcement and the communities they serve? And I also have an audience question here that is in tangential to this topic. What would you do about racial inequality in Minnesota and education, housing, health, and employment on an ever-growing diversity in our state? So if you could talk about race relations, police, community relations, how do we ensure that our diversity is something that benefits us as practitioners? So to start that, we have Mr. Frentz.
Thank you. Well, I'm a Democrat, and I preach and believe diversity. I went to K-6 schools that were integrated. I'm positive that what it says by our founding fathers, that all men are created equal. That is a given fact. Having said that, when we talk about police relations, there is no picking and choosing which laws you want to follow. We have to support the police and their ability to give communities structure. I am very proud, maybe most proud of all, to be endorsed by the Minnesota Police and Peace Officers Association. If we cannot support police, we cannot have order. If we cannot have order, we cannot have a successful society. It's that simple. Now, we have lawyers that make mistakes. We have police officers that make mistakes. We have plenty of citizens that make mistakes. We have ways to address those mistakes. But without support and respecting police when they do their job correctly, we're not going to get anybody to want to be the next generation of policemen. I worked with the Mankato police sergeant earlier this year, and he said, we want to be able to recruit the next generation of police. Now down here, we do not have significant students of color. But we have to hold both sides, if we're on different sides, to the same standard, which is these rules are to protect everybody. And as was said by Ronald Reagan, of all politicians, you cannot tell people they can choose which laws to follow. And that, above all, is what I believe for our area and our society. Now, measuring the achievement gap is an education issue, and I resist the urge to measure that by the gap between students of color and the rest. We should be trying to promote all students. We have outstanding schools in this area. I am dying to go into schools with high percentages of students with color and say, build your school up. Respect the school and the teacher. Make it so that you want to be here, so you want to be educated. Education is the great American equalizer. Every kid that gets that opportunity has to be shown. That's the way up. When we talk about the achievement gap, there are also things that I favor that are simple policy matters. I am a huge believer in pre-K. I come from a family where my mother, my father, my brother, and my sister were all public school teachers. I know we can do better for students of color and all students by providing adequate pre-kindergarten. Why? Because then they're ready to go to kindergarten. Studies have shown up and down. When the kids are ready at kindergarten, they're ready at third grade. When they're ready at third grade, they're ready at seventh grade. That's what you want. Plus, You have to accept the learning environments for every kid in that class. The more you make each kid a satisfied, happy customer, the more you're going to have a positive learning environment and less discipline problems. All of those things address the needs of all our citizens, not just students of color. And I'm positive we can send a message to all citizens in the state that we are all equal and still support police, and still support pre-K, and still support the things that are important. And by the way, when we talk about diversity, Minnesotans talk the talk and walk the walk. Diversity is an economic issue also. We need to promote everyone in order to make our businesses function and to have the right talent pool to recruit from, and so people want to come here and work because we are a welcoming state. And that applies to immigration too. That's the next stage of the workforce. We talk to farmers, they say workforce is our #1 concern. We need immigration, we need people to work on our farms. I'm a big supporter of diversity, I'm a big supporter of the police, and that's what I think. I'll stop saying that's what I think, but that's what I think.
Ms. Dailey.
Did you say me or should I?
Ms. Yes.
Okay, thank you. Diversity is part of what the whole United States is about. This shouldn't be a conversation about whether or not we agree with diversity or don't agree with diversity. It is what it is. And in fact, in Minnesota, we have an interesting situation with what we call out-migration, where we actually have more Native population leaving the state every year than coming in or coming back. If it wasn't for our refugee and immigrant population, we would have a net loss in population overall. Now, when it comes to our schools, Nick is right. Education is what can lift a lot of people out of poverty. But where that education is provided becomes problematic when people are living in neighborhoods or areas or cities that don't necessarily have the benefit of the tax base or the teacher staff that wants to work there. Part of that is affordable housing, and this is just a subject that gets into so many different areas. Part of it is affordable housing. When we build what we call affordable housing areas in certain areas of town, so that the people who can afford them, who often are of color or refugees, who don't have the advantage of the communication skills and job skills yet to be on their own here, we create areas, pockets of areas that funnel people into just a kind of a hopelessness. We do this through our rental zoning laws. We do this through trying to do the right thing by making affordable housing projects and yet leaving that segment of the population stranded. So it's bigger than that. Then there's the issue of school choice that comes in. You should have school choice. Parents should be able to lift their own children out of those areas and put them where they want, whether it be homeschooling or charter schooling or moving just to another area. School choice is really, really important for parents to have control. It's also important for parents to have as much control preschool-wise as they possibly can, so the kids don't have to go to school at 3 years old. They should be with their mothers and their fathers, letting them raise them and teach them the values that are important to them as a family. And so diversity covers so many areas of our life that we don't even think about, from real estate to education to economics. It covers everything. And yes, the farmers have told me that it's important that they have a policy in place so that they have people to work their fields. And the people that here will not take those jobs or aren't available to take those jobs. And so it is important. It's important that we recognize it. It's important that we respect it. It's important that we do everything we can as individuals to have those people become part of our neighborhoods and not part of a housing project and not funneled into schools where they cannot fight their way out.
Thank you.
As I was thinking of this question, what kind of the unspoken question, Black Lives Matter, for example. That's what I wanted to start with. It's a group that I think was started by a lot of people who had a valid concern. The suspicion of the government, what was happening, was it fair, is it not fair? When I think later how it seems to have become co-opted by the people running it, and now it really has a negative connotation to it, and that's a huge detriment to the people who want some actual change, or at least education to come from it. I think of Eric Garner, who I think was in New York City, a black man selling single cigarettes, kind of as his way of life, but New York, if I'm correct, the state, had a law against that because that got around their tax laws, and they needed the money from cigarette sales. And so, but for some law that does not need to be there, Eric Garner would still be alive. He was interacting with the police because of him selling these single cigarettes, and that's a travesty. And it's something that BLM, Black Lives Matter, really grabbed hold of, rightfully so. They've also had some events that they've trumped up that probably are not something that indicate police maltreatment. But we need to be able to talk about it without either side being so inflamed. There are a lot of things raised. I'll briefly go through them. Unemployment, minimum wage laws, if you look into them, are essentially government-imposed unemployment for certain people. And unfortunately, it's usually the lower educated, the poor, and often minorities. And so minimum wage laws are very harmful in that way. Healthcare, I'm a physician. I see anybody who walks through the door. One of my favorite co-workers at the security hospital was a gay black man, and even he himself said he might be the only one in the state. But it didn't matter to me what his personal characteristics were. So I have no qualms with making that easier access. Education, figurative mobility, in that people should have vouchers or tax credits, be able to bring their money with them and go to any school they want to, parochial, online, home, traditional schooling, religious. In addition to the figurative mobility, there should be literal mobility. They could go where they want to for education. And that has been shown to work in other countries and in states in our nation, and it'll work here.
Yeah, the next question. Okay, I guess the next question is obviously the last couple of weeks, MNsure has been back in the news because of the rather large rate increases that have been requested. And obviously that's made an issue again. How do you feel that it should be dealt with in the long term?
And then we'll go to Dr. Wernsing first.
Okay. Well, as a physician, medical training is, they say, like trying to take a drink out of a fire hydrant. There's just so much coming at you. And the business of medicine isn't something we were taught. In the last 10 years, insurance has frankly driven me from patient care, and it's very sad. I enjoy so much seeing patients, but for every hour I spend seeing patients, the documentation, the time I spend away from my family, working over lunch, it got so that when Sunday night would roll around, I dreaded the next week of clinic because of the paperwork, the bureaucracy. What I've done now is I contract directly with my patients. It's a $45 a month fee. They can text, email, Skype, come visit me in person. And compared to how much my clinic I was working at charged them before, my costs were like 20–30% of what the clinic I was working at before was. And it's because all the administrators, the people trying to eke that last little bit of money out of a system like MNsure. So you do have to get rid of a lot of the administrative overhead of clinics in order to get these costs down. I own a small business, and I buy my family's health insurance, and the price increases are amazing. It's ridiculous. And then what it covers is even worse. We'll go to a clinic visit, an ER, and I sometimes wonder why I have insurance, because it ends up being so expensive. Insurance should go back to covering large events, and then predictable things, vaccines, annual physicals, should be open to the free market. They're doing this in Kansas and in Florida. People I know I've met with, and they're driving prices down so much. People that have insurance are coming to pay them directly because it's so much easier and better price. And so free market principles and insurance going back to major medical, like it used to be called, would be a couple of things I would consider.
Where we at? Mr. Frentz.
Well, thank you for asking about MNsure. Raise your hand if you did not read about MNsure in the last 2 weeks. Good. First of all, rising healthcare costs are not anything new. Between 1999 and 2009, healthcare costs in the United States went up 131%. We didn't come by some new problem. I saw a story that said national magazines had rising healthcare costs on their cover 178 times between 1999 and 2009. So we're talking about healthcare costs, and as a good friend of mine said, healthcare is not free, it's actually very expensive. But fast forward then to the Affordable Care Act. I stand in support of the basic principle of the Affordable Care Act, was just to insure more Americans. There are two cost drivers in the American health system: utilization and the prices that are being paid. Utilization, this one's easy for me this week. I went with my cousin Christopher Paul Frost this weekend. We were downtown, and he said, hey, I got both my knees done. He's my age. What do you mean? And he was going up these stairs. He said, yeah, it's great. He said, I got both knees replaced. I said, well, what's the retail on that? He said, it's about $28,000 a knee. $60,000 for this gentleman to have two new knees. Now, level up pieces. But that $60,000 that 30 years ago we would not be spending. At our line of work, we see medical bills 10, 20, 30 pages a day, and I've been doing my job for 3 decades. The amount of money that's being spent on American health care is through the roof. I'm not saying that's bad. The Commonwealth Fund did a study that said Minnesota is #1 in the nation in the quality of health care that it delivers. So folks, we're getting a ton of health care, and it costs a fortune, and I'm not saying that's all bad. Now, into this, the Affordable Care Act says to the states, hey, do you want to set up your own plan? And Minnesota, being an innovator and involving some very intelligent legislators, said, all right, we'll take a shot at it. Here's what's happened. The individual market now has skyrocketed. Minnesota had the poorest stay in Minnesota care. So that 5%, that's what's in the news, the 5% in the individual market. It's up astronomically. Here's something that you're going to start hearing about in the next few weeks as we really drill down. In 2015, the Commissioner of Commerce, this is bipartisan, this is not someone who's a Republican or a Democrat, this is someone whose job it is to provide health and human services. In 2015, the Commissioner said, we are going to have a crisis in the individual market. I really appreciated the KEYC story on this last week, where they said, let's look what happened in 2015. The Commissioner proposed a number of reforms, predicting, now we know correctly, that the individual market was going to be in crisis. Those reforms were discussed by the legislature. I'm not going to cast aspersions on either political party, but we now know they did not pass. And would we know it, the individual market rates are now out and they're through the roof. There are things we can do. Minnesotans are pretty smart. But one of the plans that I support is the reinsurance plan. This is one of the things that was discussed in 2015. The simple fact is the people that had no health insurance before 2015 that became eligible in the individual market were some of the sickest, some of the most needy, and some of the poorest of all of those among us. And they required treatments on a one-time unimaginable scale because Minnesota doctors can now provide it. It's not just needs, it's pharmaceutical costs, it's surgeries, it's end-of-life care. Folks, we're going to have to ask some tough questions about how much medical care you want Minnesota citizens to get. Now keep in mind, MNsure is an exchange. I chuckle when I hear people say, well, my MNsure rates are too high, or MNsure drove up the cost. The insurance commissioner said in 2014, was MNsure responsible for the rise in costs? The simple answer, one word, no. But what is going on is Minnesotans now have care available to them. They're being charged a lot of money, and there's no stopping how much care they get. Now, we'll talk about this in the future. How much care do you want them to have? Would you want a Minnesotan to get $100,000 worth of medical care to stay alive 1 week? You can't blame the person for wanting to be alive that week. You can't blame his family for wanting the insurance company to pay it, but that cost gets spread around. Reinsurance allows the risk of this individual market to 5%. to be spread over a broader spectrum. And if you'd like to review, the state of Alaska actually did put that in. And we're just hearing now 2 weeks ago that that was a successful program. It all boils down to this. There is no such thing as a free lunch. We can argue about who pays and how much, but if we're going to get this much health care, it's going to cost. I tend to feel that the benefits of insuring all these Minnesotans, we're now down to 95% of Minnesotans have health insurance. We've cut in half, 220,000 Minnesotans who now have health insurance who did it under the new program. That benefit is worth it. And by the way, if you like budgets, we talked about the general fund, I'm guessing it'll come out again. In 2014, 2015, Minnesota budgeted for health care costs and came in $900 million below what they planned to spend, mostly due to the fact that other people had bought insurance that they weren't expecting. Our state surplus of $900 million. That's where that comes from. I favor working on insurance, both sides of the aisle, to come up with plans that will allow the individual market to be stabilized. And among those are allowing Minnesota care to be sold statewide and with rates that reflect the fact that we pay more in the outstate. Of course it costs more to treat someone from rural county. They don't have a hospital on the corner. The ambulance doesn't have to drive 6 blocks, it has to drive 6 miles. We'll have to ask ourselves, though, at what point do we say, that's just not care we're going to provide? Because there's nothing stopping medical innovation. There's nothing stopping the pharmaceutical companies from raising these prices. And although my cousin Christopher now has 2 good new knees, there's plenty of other knees out there. If we're going to replace them all, someone's going to have to pay for it. So I favor working on insurance. There's plenty of reasonable alternatives. And if we can solve our other problem in Minnesota, we can solve this one. Thank you. Oops, sorry about that.
Wow. Health insurance is the #1 polling issue among voters in the state of Minnesota, and it is in crisis. We had, before this year, in Minnesota, one of the highest participation rates in insurance in the United States already. We had in Minnesota already a program in place to insure people with pre-existing conditions. And we had in Minnesota already in place Minnesota Care and Medicaid to take care of people below an income level to afford their own. And we had a 47% participation rate in the individual market that has been taken down to 5% in just a couple of years. Now, we had, I don't know what the exact percentage was, but as I said, very, very high participation rate in health insurance. So we have traded off 1.5% for another 5%. I keep hearing from people who support the Affordable Care Act and insure that, well, it's only 5% that are affected by these exorbitant increases. Only 5%. I don't want to be one of the not important. You know, I heard a story today about, in fact, an insurance agent who just found out that at 52 years old, his family of 4 is going to be paying $2,400 a month for their own private insurance. $2,400 a month. There are people who don't make that much money a month. We're getting to the point where people who like their doctor and want to keep their doctor and want to keep their plan are going to have to eat up their entire retirement incomes in order to have health insurance just to live to be retirement age. Something has to be done about this. It has to be done very, very quickly because we can't keep dipping into our retirement savings in order to be insured. And Nick is right that there are a lot of things that drive the cost of health care beyond control. But the answer to that isn't more government control, putting another patch on it, reinsurance, or controlling the cost of prescription drugs. I mean, the market was working just fine before all this. I don't know why we jumped into a MNsure program in the first place without seeing what was actually happening at the federal level with the Affordable Care Act just being in. And there aren't that many states that jumped into this. And I think that we have to take a hard look at whether or not we should go back to the way that we have things already, with our own pre-existing condition plan, with our own plan to take care of the poor, and the vulnerable. And the biggest thing I see as a gap after participating in the Care Providers Minnesota Forum is that the Affordable Care Act and MNsure doesn't nearly address the problem with our seniors enough. There's gaps there. There's gaps too. They did some expansions of Medicare and the Affordable Care Act, but it's not enough. And there are people now looking at supplements that are going to jump from $100 a month to $500 a month in the not too distant future. I'm 60. I'm looking at this. This is coming up for me. And I'm very concerned about it, as are most of the people that I talk to. We had a perfectly good plan in place. And what we've done now is created a scenario where we have to put patches on top of patches in order to fix it. And I would rather see us go back to what we had in the beginning that took care of everybody and not have to trade off 5% of the population for another 5%. Thanks.
Thank you. Let's I think this one was our last question before we go into our closing statements. So let's let the candidates talk about some of their priorities. And so my question to you is, say you are fortunate enough to be elected to represent District 19 at the state legislature. You show up at the doors of the Capitol on your first day. What are the first 2 or 3 pieces of legislation that you will introduce? And Ms. Dailey, we'll start with you.
Yeah. I don't have a whole laundry list of legislation that I want to introduce. I'm a believer that the less government does for us, the better off we are sometimes. There are some things that I do think need to be done, and one thing that's just kind of a personal thing to me because I'm in the real estate business is I would like to see real estate home inspectors be licensed the same as appraisers, the same as real estate agents, and held to a standard. This is a consumer protection issue with training and continuing education just as the rest of us. That's one thing that comes to mind. But did I create a list of things that I'm going to go in and legislate? I don't need to be validated by having my name on a bill. What I want to do is go in there and evaluate why we are where we are. What is the system that's being wasted? You know, we have bills and legislation that are littered with all kinds of special interests in them to the point where we can't get past the very necessity that the bill was originated from. And so what I'd like to do as your state senator is, number one, call my staff together and tell them what my culture is all about, how I want them to communicate to constituents, and that I want it to be open and honest and fair. I don't want to make talking points, just make promises that I can't keep. No one senator, no one legislator can promise you that they're going to get anything through in particular. We can promise we'll work hard, but the right things are going to come from you to us, from the ground up. Just as I learned budgeting, from the bottom up, from the people all the way up to the top. And that's why some of these issues like healthcare, education, transportation, it's good to be a candidate. This has just been such a learning experience for me in the last few months to find out what's going on out there and what people think. And I will forever be grateful for it, no matter what happens on November 8th.
Dr. Wernsing.
Okay. So, top 3 things. I also don't have a list I keep in my mind, but as I mentioned before, one thing I envision is, instead of all of you having only 3 people to choose from, having many more to choose from. We're one of the few developed countries that doesn't have 5, 6, 7, 9 healthy parties debating, trying to come to a consensus, and truly making relationships, trying to craft legislation that will get a majority support. So I envision trying to seek that through being able to vote with more freedom, being able to choose many people per position and have ranked choice, or rather proportional representation. You should be able to find somebody who most matches up with you and get him or her into the legislature if you can. End-of-life freedom position, I've seen a lot of people die in many planned ways, unplanned ways, and everything in between. I went to the listening session that some of our area legislators put on, and I actually printed the bill, and as a physician edited it, and I was going to send it in to somebody, but then it died. But I had ways that could increase the freedom of physicians who wanted to be involved and patients who wanted to be involved, but also increase the freedom of physicians who did not want to be involved. So make a legislation that won't trap anybody one way or the other, but will allow people to choose when to end their life if that's something their religion, their family, their morals allows. And lastly, one bill, one subject. So any of us out here can look it up, read through something that's maybe only 3 or 4 pages instead of 40, 80, or 1,000, and attach sunset provisions to them. Like I said before, even if it's 50 years, this will make somebody in the future look at it and say, is it good, is it bad? Legislation never ends on its own, or rarely so. But if it comes up and people know this is ending in 2 or 3 years unless we deal with it, people will look at it, they'll craft it, they'll edit it, and they'll do something with it. And that will contain costs and increase liberty for all of us.
Mr. Frentz?
Well, one of the great joys of the last year has been studying how the legislature works. It's cool, and it's fair, it's messy, but each party has its role, each house has its role, and if you want a law passed, you have to get it by the House, by the Senate, and have the governor sign it. This system has got us to this point in American history. Let's face it, we're the greatest country in the history of the world. This is one of the reasons democracy works. The 3 bills that I would want to start introducing, without question, Highway 14. I would love to join my friend Clark Johnson in reaching across the aisle and saying to metro area legislators, Republican legislators, hey, let's do this one to show the state of Minnesota that we're in it together. I've already talked to you about the safety implications. It also has implications for our happiness. It has implications for our business. A stable, secure, dedicated funding stream for transportation is just what we need. And I think that'd be a bill I'd put my name on in the first 10 minutes at the legislature. Number 2, the State Security Hospital. I am very proud to be endorsed by Local 404, the group of over 600 staff workers at the State Security Hospital. And let me tell you, they have a legitimate concern of safety. If you want people to take those jobs in the state hospital, and the state's your employer, you better make those people feel important. And one of the simplest ways is to say safety, we are there with you. This is a bonding issue. We have things we can do at the state hospital to make those workers safe. And by the way, I'm talking about a balance between the interests of the patient and the staff. Not just the people who are security counselors, but the professionals, the administration. That is a key driver of the local economy, especially in St. Peter. That's an asset of Senate District 19. And one of my priorities would be to introduce legislation and work, go around the Senate and say, hey, Senator so-and-so from such and such, will you work with us on the State Security Hospital? It's that important to us. If you do, the people in Senate District 19 will not forget it. And then finally, as I said, I come from a family of educators. I love working with kids. I've been doing it my whole life. I got a couple emails today from high school kids saying, what can we do for your campaign? I emailed them right back. I said, where were you in July? But pre-kindergarten, proper funding of education, whatever form it takes, that's an investment that Minnesotans have always valued. That's a bill that can introduce. That's what counts, isn't it? What your education system is what you stand for. And Minnesotans, both Republicans, Democrats, and all their parties have always made education a priority, and we've always prospered by it. I've gone around the state talking to various legislators and legislative candidates, and I can tell you, they think this area and its education is top-notch. I will never forget an event I went to in Le Sueur with another state senator from another district walked by me and said, somewhat under his breath, wish I had Mankato in my district. And he meant the schools. And the third thing I would emphasize would be education. I would be proud to stand on the floor of the Senate and speak for education, and pre-kindergarten is just a part of it. The last thing I would say is that whatever the bills are, and I think we had 1,400 introduced last session, You want to have your senator read every single word on every single page and understand them and talk to people and say, what is it that's best for the people in Senate District 19, and what is it that's best for the people in Minnesota, and that is my promise to you if you elect me as your senator. Thank you.
All right, thank you. We're going to go to closing statements. Mr. Frentz, you have the first closing statement, followed by Ms. Dailey, and then Dr. Elmore.
I just sat down.
Well, you can do your closing statement.
No, makes no sense. Listen, thank you very much, folks. And thank you, Patrick. Thank you, Dion. Thanks to my worthy opponents. Willa, you're exactly right. There's a thrill on the campaign trail. It's the coolest thing ever. And I have a nice wife and 4 kids, so if I say it's the coolest thing ever, I'm talking about cool. I appreciate you taking the time to listen to us. As I said at the beginning, you're not sitting here unless you care about what happens to our future. We can talk about where we've been. I love history. I'm much more interested in talking about where we're going. As your state senator, I want to stand for the kind of senator that works across party lines. Someone who can say to local and statewide representatives, all right, what do you got? What's important to you? Why is it good? And to try to build bridges, literally and figuratively, for the good of our area and for the whole state. Those things count. I want to be able to say, as I have for the last 10 years, that's our senator. I'm proud of that senator. She's awesome. And I feel like I do the same things for you if you send me to St. Paul. I'm one of those guys who always runs around and makes our kids listen to a bunch of haughty rhetoric. But I love Thomas Jefferson, where he said, you're entitled to life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. The pursuit of happiness. What do you love? Hunting? Do you love football? Do you love raising kids? Do you love horses? You get to chase that in America, and you sure as heck get to chase that down here. And that is what I think we're looking for all our elected representatives, and I'm proud to be campaigning in front of you. At the end of the day, it comes down to this. Your next senator has to be smart enough to figure out what the issues are. Has to be willing to work hard enough to figure out the best solutions. Has to be strong enough to not just advocate for those things, but to talk back to their own party, to their own leaders, and say, hey, we're on the wrong side of this, let's fix it. And finally, to care enough. And as I told you at the beginning, I'm an unapologetic cheerleader for this area and for all of you. I'm asking for your vote to send me to St. Paul as the next state senator. I appreciate very much you taking the time to be here, and I hope you have a great night. Thank you.
Ms. Dailey.
Thanks. It's been an hour and a half, and we've covered a lot of things, but not nearly the tip of the iceberg of everything else that's going on. And as we all answered questions and talked, it brought up other things and other things and other things that I thought about over the course of this. And I'll tell you that a 2-minute soundbite is tough to get your thoughts out completely. I will be meeting afterwards, make myself available for anybody who maybe didn't get their question addressed, or that didn't get a question that I was already asked fully answered in that 2 minutes. You can also get a hold of me by phone or by email. One of the things that I want to mention that I'm extremely proud of is the endorsements that I have. And I will tell you, as I told you in the beginning, we got lots of questionnaires and surveys from everybody. And I did not fill them out to a great extent. What I looked for were the things that affect the vast majority of people and not just special interests. Some of the things that Nick has been endorsed for, I didn't even have the opportunity to address. But I do have a 100% rating from Minnesota Citizens Concerned for Life. And I also have an A rating from the National Rifle Association. And those things are near and dear to me as they are to a lot of you, whether you're Democrat or Republican. What I want you to look at in electing a senator is someone who has a record for consensus, which I have from my business. Someone who recognizes a problem and isn't afraid to dig in and fix it. I work very, very hard at my own job. It's physically and emotionally grueling sometimes, but I'm at a point in my life now where I can really give myself to this and being able to help people in large numbers instead of just one person at a time. Through my real estate and auction business, I have been able to deal with people who they had to sell their prized possessions to make the next mortgage payment. I've dealt with the IRS where they're selling off, asking me to sell off all the equipment of a business owner. because they owe back taxes, because there's no way to negotiate it. So we put a small business person out of business with no equipment to start up again. These are the kinds of things I deal with every week in my business, one person at a time. And I'd like to be able to exponentially grow that so that I can do it for more people at a time and help everybody realize economic prosperity down the road for Minnesota and maintain the quality of life that we already love. And most of all, maintain our independence and our freedom and our individual rights. Vote for me November 8th. Thanks.
Thank you. Dr. Wernsing.
Thanks. Well, somehow, despite the two fine candidates that the major parties have put forward, interest in the third party is skyrocketing. And I want to thank you for considering me for your vote. I have website, email, phone number. Please call me with questions we didn't get to tonight. Our nation, our exceptional nation, when founded, had a 95% poverty rate. In the first couple hundred years, with very minimal government involvement, that 95% went to about 14%. Freedom, economic, and personal is what drove that. The war on poverty began, and after about $20 trillion being spent, that 14% went to 14.7%. We spent enough money that every family in poverty could have been given $85,000 a year. I think the math works out to. Yet they're still all in poverty. There's motion between the two groups, but meaning poverty to middle class and back again. But I want you to consider that liberty, economic and personal, and minimal government can be a solution to many of these problems, and I will champion that. In medical school, the best answer that could be given if it was true was, I don't know, but I will find out. When I'm faced with something, legislation, a question, and I don't know the answers, I will seek the input of anybody that I can, including people that didn't endorse my candidacy. And I'll close with this. If you are not harming others, not taking their stuff, not destroying their property, you should be left alone by the government as much as possible. Thank you again for coming, and please consider voting for me on November 8th.
Thank you all. Thank you all for being here. Be an excellent audience. Let's give these candidates a round.
You did very nice and well your best.
Thanks.
Appreciate it.
Yeah, nice job.